In this section, we'll look at the career of Joseph McCarthy and his political anti-communism, which became known as McCarthyism. Certainly, Joseph McCarthy was the most famous of the Red Scare politicians. He'd been elected to the Senate in 1946 from Wisconsin and had already acquired a reputation among his opponents as being ruthless politically. Now, looking at the national mood and HUAC's apparent popularity, McCarthy decided to use anti-communism an issue to gain his own popularity. He had, by 1950 anyway, very little success or recognition in the Senate. McCarthy first leveled charges on February 9, 1950, in a speech at the Republicans' Women Club in Wheeling, West Virginia. And in that speech, he held up a piece of paper and declared that on it were the names of 205 communists in the State Department. The following night in Salt Lake City, he again made the charge, this time saying he had the names of 51 communists in the State Department. A week later, he said the number was 81. Despite the press, which was great, no one complained about the discrepancies because it was great headlines and the media loved it. McCarthy's plan worked well. He became almost instantly nationally famous. He used the slogan, Congress needs a tail gunner, implying the U.S. needed someone to watch out for communists at home, and supposedly playing on his duty as a tail gunner in World War II. There's a famous picture of him sitting in the cockpit with the gun. McCarthy had in reality never been a tail gunner or even seen combat. He'd been an aircraft mechanic at the Pacific during the war. The Senate called a committee led by a respected Maryland Senator, Miller Tidings, to investigate McCarthy's charges. Tidings pressed McCarthy to name just one communist, and McCarthy named Owen Lattimore, then a Johns Hopkins University professor and expert on the Far East. Tidings' committee investigated the charges and later cleared Lattimore. McCarthy was angry and then worked to defeat Tidings in the next election. He was weak on communism was a charge. In fact, Tidings was defeated. The charges had worked, and McCarthy's power seemed assured. After Tidings' defeat, everyone was afraid to directly challenge McCarthy. He next accused the U.S. representative in the General Assembly of the UN, Philip Jessup. With McCarthy's big name, he was chosen to head a special Senate committee to investigate communists in the U.S. government. It was similar to HUAC, only more powerful and more reckless. Democrats were kind of afraid of fighting back and thus being labeled a communist. Republicans, initially at least, liked McCarthy's attacks on Democrats as creeping socialism and really didn't do much to rein him in. And in fact, the committee's investigations went on for several years, and they ended up destroying the lives of hundreds of individuals that were never connected to communism. No proof was ever offered. McCarthy sort of became one of the worst American political demagogues in U.S. history. State and local committees were formed to investigate communists in their ranks, and again, the charges alone, the slander alone, could ruin a person's career. As Truman left office, anti-communism McCarthyism was running rampant. McCarthy was so popular in 1952 that no one, not even Ike, really tried to make it an issue in that year's election. McCarthyism was running rampant. The hysteria was just too much. McCarthy, however, in 1954 began charging the army with being rife with communists. After World War II in Korea, the army was probably the one institution Americans trusted more than anything else. So it was a lot tougher than accusing liberal Democrats of being communist. In the spring of 1954, McCarthy began to hold the famous Army McCarthy hearings, and it was for the first time televised, so people could see for the first time McCarthy's arrogance and the fact that there were no specifics, and he would always say point of order and he'd cut people off. There was a testimony from a witness who said to McCarthy, "Have you no decency, sir? Have you no decency, sir?" It began to shift the public's opinion, and for the first time Ike spoke out against him, again hurting McCarthy's popularity because Ike was so popular. After the Army McCarthy hearings turned up nothing and the public opinion began to shift against McCarthy, the Senate began investigations into McCarthy himself. And long story short, in December 1954, the Senate voted 67 to 22 to censure McCarthy, and he ultimately died drunk, disgraced in 1957. This concludes this section on Joseph McCarthy and the period of McCarthyism.